All right, hey everybody. For this episode, we are going to talk about what running a business actually feels like. So let's begin with the reality people never see behind true business ownership. And this is coming from a serial business owner, an entrepreneur. So let's talk about it. A lot of people want the freedom of owning their own business, but very few people actually want the responsibility that comes with that. And it's funny because many people think that we have this American dream here. And that dream is to own your own business and be able to be your own boss and work for yourself. Well, let's establish some things here. First of all, nowadays especially, social media glamorizes entrepreneurship. So most people see money, flexibility, status, independence, but they rarely see under the surface. And under the surface, there's a lot of stress, anxiety, uncertainty, operational burden, legal risk, isolation, constant problem solving. Kind of goes with the whole saying more money, more problems. And let me tell you something. Anybody who says that's bullshit has probably never made any decent money. Because I can tell you for sure, more money equals more problems because it's not really just about the money. It's about how you made the damn money. Okay? It's not exactly that, oh, I have millions of dollars and that's problematic. It's how I'm making the millions of dollars. That is the problem. So, owning a business often means carrying pressure nobody else sees. So, let's talk about hidden stress and responsibility. So, again, entrepreneurship creates this invisible psychological weight, and it can weigh you down like an anchor. What does an anchor do? Makes it so you can't move, right? So there's constant background stress. You're literally always mentally on, and problems never fully disappear. And if you have employees, you're thinking about payroll, taxes, inventory, compliance, customer issues. Oh my God, customer issues. We go through life and we acquire wisdom through our life experience, right? I think that a lot of people acquire wisdom much better and swiftly than others. But some people roll through life and they hit 60, 70, 80 years old, and it seems like they have the wisdom of a damn teenager. So just because you're older doesn't necessarily mean that you've acquired the wisdom, because wisdom requires intellectual and emotional application of the life experiences. So even if you've had the life experience, if it's not applied internally, that doesn't come out as wisdom. So employees can clock out, literally, physically and mentally. But you can't do that as an entrepreneur. So when you work for yourself and you're your own boss, well, the business follows you home every day, doesn't it? Or you don't even get to go home. You get to sleep on the floor in your office. And yes, that's something I've had to do before. On my concrete floor with just a little piece of that commercial carpet with no padding. Yep, it sucks. Because I didn't even have a futon in there or nothing. Just had chairs, folding chairs, and tables. So I slept on the floor. I've also slept in a chair many times. So responsibility becomes ambient, okay? So let me just relate this to my businesses. So I would say that, unfortunately for me, and I'm not saying that in a sense like poor Alex, okay? Because I chose this, right? But my businesses all come with the government attached. So literally, I have licenses and certifications with the state of Virginia and with the federal government as well. Like a plethora of them to run my businesses and to do what I need to do. This isn't like I'm some literary agent that doesn't need anything. They literally need nothing to be a literary agent. There's nothing, no licensing, no nothing. There's really no oversight in that particular industry at all. And I'm not saying that it's not valid. I'm just saying my industry is completely the polar opposite. So does that add to the stress? Somewhat. It does. But again, I signed up for it. So let me bring you back to a time. So we had this big security contract, and at one time I had upwards of 50 employees. And with 50 employees, I kind of was thinking to myself, like, wow, I have like 50 mouths to feed. And, I think both directly and indirectly that was true. I really did. And, I could feel that weight, that burden. And honestly, I don't think that there's a better word to use than burden, because that is what it felt like. And, your employees expect stability. And that is what I provided them. But it wasn't always easy. So for example, when we first got the contract, the company was making money, but maybe to the tune of a quarter of what it needed to sustain and maintain the payroll. And I mean, this contract needed to go from 0 to 100 real quick. Literally, we needed to ramp up from 0 employees to a dozen in 2 weeks. And then another 2 weeks, we needed to have double that. And then by the 3rd or 4th month, we needed to have 4 dozen employees. So like I said, we had 49. Okay, so nearly 50 employees at this one contract in 2 different states. So I needed to now deal with licensing requirements in another state as well. So that was more administrative paperwork and more stress added onto an already stressful operation. Let's put it that way. And customers are unpredictable as well. When we were building out the rifle line, the first thing that we did is we began to build our rifles using other receivers that we did not make ourselves in-house, but we re-serialized them and we rebranded them on our own because we had the manufacturing license. And then we would use essentially parts kits that we got from major distributors, and we created a lineup. And we sold hundreds of those basically as a pilot program to see, hey, will this stuff sell and at what price point? So we made all these different configurations and we began to sell these mainly online because we really didn't like the whole physical storefront issue for this type of pilot program we were running for our rifle lineup. So we did that for a couple years, and our business is very customer client based. So we obviously have the training academy. So we see a lot of our customers, our clients in person, right? And this is not just an interaction like, you go to Kohl's and you buy a shirt and you meet a cashier, you might see somebody walking around the store. They might ask you if they can help you. No. This is much more than that. We have a lot of contact with our clients and with our students. So to try to please everybody becomes a somewhat arduous task. But over the years, I developed a plan, an action plan, if you will, for my instructors in particular. And part of the plan was, listen, first of all, there's some rules. Don't ever talk to a student or a client like they're your friend, because they're not. Number 2, keep it professional at all times. Number 3, and this is big, realize that before you begin to teach a class, you are not going to immediately connect with all of the students for whatever reason or reasons, just as the same goes for you cannot be friends with everyone. You can't please everybody. Not everyone's going to like you. And you have to accept that going into it. But what you can do is mitigate and minimize your complaints that you get. And the way you do that is to stop the complaint before it comes in. So if you feel that a student is giving you an issue, you feel an issue brewing with a client, you pull them aside, you talk about it, and you try to provide a solution essentially, before that becomes a problem. So it's not that you address the problem like it's a P.O. box, but it's that you try to get in front of it before it becomes a problem. And that's one of the core ideas. So let's talk about another thing now, loneliness in entrepreneurship. So we talked about some of the psychological makeup of owning your own business and how that really feels, right? But entrepreneurship is often psychologically isolating. So let me explain. Only a few people understand the pressure, and it's hard to talk about openly. Employees only see like a very tiny picture, and your friends, even your loved ones, can romanticize the business and the fact that you're your own boss. And your family just might not really understand the risk. So again, entrepreneurship is really about carrying a lot of pressure silently. And also leadership can become emotionally isolating. So you can be surrounded by great people and feel operationally alone. And at some points during my operation, that's how I felt, because we are literally in the center of Washington, D.C., our nation's capital, and Richmond, Virginia, the capital of Virginia. And we are an absolute hub. And when I say that, it's probably understated. For military, former and current military. And the amount of military personnel that I have personally trained, definitely well within the hundreds. And I have trained many trained killers, people that have definitely watched people die in combat. Not only that, but they have taken lives in combat too. And I think, contrary to popular belief, a lot of people think that these guys openly speak about it, openly talk about it, and say, hey, yeah, I've got 4 confirmed kills. Well, that's bullshit. That's Hollywood stuff right there, because that's usually not how it is. A lot of these guys are some of the most humble guys I've ever met in my life. Trained a few former Navy SEALs, and yeah, they definitely have a mouth like a sailor, like the saying goes. But aside from that, they're very humble. And the highest ranking officers that I've trained, I trained 1 colonel, and I've also trained 2 lieutenant colonels. And just to mind you, a colonel is 1 below general. So that is an extremely high rank in the U.S. Army. So not only that, I've trained probably thousands of law enforcement guys as well. I've had my fair share of law enforcement that would come to us because they couldn't pass their shooting qualification. And it's really not their fault, because a lot of these guys, they're in their early 20s and they go through the police academy and they only have 40 hours of handgun training in the police academy. And it's based on the same thing school's based on, right? So like they're kind of judging a fish on its ability to climb a tree. It's standardized. Everybody gets the same thing. So sometimes it's just not enough. Sometimes it doesn't click. So they come to us and we can get 9 out of 10 of them to pass. I can really only remember a handful, if that. Definitely I can count on one hand the amount of students I really have had come through the school in the past 14 years that I just could not get them to pass qualification. I just couldn't, regardless. And, I'll go with me. I'll go with the training director, assistant training director, one of my adjunct instructors. I get different instructors on it, different approaches, because I know that some students don't always connect with that instructor. So you get another instructor. And only happened a handful of times. But getting back to business ownership. So let's talk a little bit about how it's glamorized. Okay. So most entrepreneurship is repetitive and it's an operational grind. Okay. So social media shows the cars and the watches and the travel and like the private planes, the private jets, the CEO life. Well, if you make it to that level, maybe, but the vast majority of entrepreneurs aren't at that level and will never be at that level. It doesn't mean you're not a C level. It doesn't mean you're not an executive. It doesn't mean that you're not the president of a company. It doesn't mean that you're not a business owner. It just means that you don't have tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars in liquidity. Also, you have to separate from that too. Liquidity versus net worth. You shouldn't judge yourself just by net worth, because you know what? There are a shitload of paper millionaires. As a matter of fact, most baby boomers at this time in the 2020s are probably paper millionaires. What do I mean by that? I mean that their 401ks and their house being probably paid off, most of them, unless they refinanced or did something stupid, or they bought another one or were house poor, they're probably worth $1 million on paper. But it's not liquidity. They'd have to sell their house to get it, or they'd have to withdraw money out of their 401k, and they're probably collecting Social Security, so they want to be careful about doing that, especially if they live another 20 or so years and they don't have another income other than Social Security. But net worth, 7 figures. Liquidity is a different thing. Liquidity is how much money do you essentially have in the bank right now, cash. Or liquidity could be considered gold, for example, paper cash as well. But liquidity is not cars, diamonds, watches, cars, houses. That's not what is considered liquid asset right now. So there's a huge difference. So a lot of people are making a lot of money through their business, but are cash poor. So this CEO lifestyle, well, not everybody's living it. And everybody's living it at a different level. The reality is emails, administrative compliance issues, customer service, logistics, spreadsheets, phone calls, problem solving, it's constant. So most business ownership is just, I'm telling you, it's not glamorous, it's operational. So that segues into operational risks that nobody sees. So like rent, payroll, insurance, inventory, advertising, compliance, licensing, regulation, lawsuits, processor issues, equipment failures. And let me tell you something about the lawsuits. Honestly, you might look at it and say, well, I'm never going to get sued. I'm never going to sue anybody. But most big successful companies, they get sued. It just happens. And again, it goes to the customer service thing. You just can't please everybody, even if you do everything right. So many businesses operate real on thin margins than people realize. Like take Walmart, for example. Do you know that their net profit is like 1%, sometimes 2%? That's it. But you know what? They have so much volume, their net profit still equals the billions. So most people dramatically, and I can't understate that, okay? It's dramatically underestimate operational fragility as an entrepreneur. So one unexpected problem can take months to overcome. And that's why most businesses fail despite competent owners. And that's why you have to balance freedom with responsibility. Because there were times in my life where I had no work-life balance. So for example, I just knew I was going to be in the middle of teaching a class when I had my first kid. And sure enough, she's texting me in the middle of having, her water's breaking. She's got to go to the hospital, and I'm in the middle of teaching a class. But I had already anticipated it, and I had my assistant instructor on call for like 2-3 week period, and I had him there within a couple hours, and I left, brought her to the hospital. I knew it was going to be like that, but man, that is like the lack of work-life balance, okay? And that's another reason that I was resistant to having kids initially, because I needed to focus on me and building my business. So for the first couple years, I was able to do that. And now 2 kids later and several businesses later, well, I still struggle daily with that work-life balance. So entrepreneurship trades structure for responsibility, and you gain autonomy, but you also inherit a shitload of risk. So anyway, all this freedom sounds exciting, right? But everything literally depends on you. So last thing, entrepreneurship is essentially another form of delayed gratification. So there's slow reputation building, delayed financial payoff, infrastructure takes years, if not decades, systems compound slowly, trust builds slowly, brand recognition builds slowly. So most businesses aren't built in explosive moments. They're built in repeated, ordinary days, and people overestimate short-term results and underestimate long-term accumulation. So I'll leave you with this. Entrepreneurship is not instant freedom. It is not instant wealth. It is not instant fulfillment. But it is a combination of pressure, uncertainty, systems, persistence, and delayed compounding. So a business can become incredibly rewarding, but usually not immediately. Most people want the outcome of entrepreneurship without the psychological burden. So ownership sounds exciting until the responsibility becomes real. So I'm going to leave you with this. The people who survive and become successful entrepreneurs aren't the loudest. They're the ones who kept building after all the excitement disappeared.